Patrick Murphy is the Program Director and University of Notre Dame Initiative for Global Development. He has 20 years of experience as a systems engineer, operations research analyst, research development acquisition program manager, and military intelligence officer. He has provided analytical and management expertise for research and acquisition programs in academia, industry, and government. Currently, he initiates and leads R&D efforts that apply academic capabilities towards solving global developmental challenges. He organizes multidisciplinary research and education programs in a broad range of development-related topics. He's developed collaborations that include faculty from engineering, science, social science, and the fine arts. Prior to coming to Notre Dame, Mr. Murphy managed research efforts in the Homeland Security Advanced Research Projects Agency and provide for more resilient electric power systems to prevent and recover from disasters. For the military, developed models to predict approximate technology development and integration timelines for complex systems. He earned his BS and BA from the University of Notre Dame, an MA from George Washington University in International Affairs, Science, Technology, and Policy Concentration and Operations Research. He will tell us how he is doing the impossible in remote communities of Africa and elsewhere. Please welcome Patrick Murphy.
Can you hear me away from the mic? I don't like podiums. And can I make this work? Yes, I can do the impossible. It's not the impossible. I don't like to take too much credit for it. My job is not to do the impossible, it's to get resources to people that don't have them. Some of those resources are knowledge, some of it's material, a lot of it's money. Can you see the bottom left picture on this slide? Where is that? Anybody take a guess? Where is that? We can go interactive here. China? It could be, but it's not. But that's kind of the point. It could be Sao Paulo, it could be China, it could be South Africa. That is a challenge in the developing world where electricity costs more than people can afford, so people throw a wire up to it to try to get it because they need it in order to develop, but can't afford it. Which then leads to a downward spiral of the availability and the reliability of that grid because that's not maintainable. That has more power going out than the utility put in. It has less money coming in than it takes to operate and maintain it. So then you end up with the Roman aqueduct decaying and decaying until you have a collapse. That in the next picture there is in DR Congo. They don't have to collapse. They don't have anything. We'll talk about more of these. So we'll talk about lack of electricity, what it means for development. And it's more than just access. Everybody talks about access to broadband, access to electricity, but there's some reliability issues that we need to talk about too. And we'll skip the About NDIGD, my group. You guys can take that home and read that at your leisure. So if you don't have access to electricity, you're poor, period. Let's do a little exercise. Everybody stand up. If your birthday does not have a 1, 2, or 3. It's not the first, second, or third of the month. Sit down. Can you touch someone who is not sitting down without moving? You're the guys. So the guys that are standing have electricity in the developing world. The guys that can reach and touch them are the ones that can walk and charge their phone at that place. The guys that can't may be able to afford a phone, may be able to get one, but they have to walk 10 kilometers to charge it. They have to leave it at a charging station overnight and then maybe get it the next day. They don't get to tweet what's going on in their life. They don't get to call a friend to get a ride from somewhere. They can't afford the ride anyway. But what I'm saying is it's more, and then, now, everyone whose birthday is not on the first or second sit down. These are the guys whose power might actually be on, because it's not just whether the cord gets there, it's whether it works from end to end, and we'll talk about that in a second. So, if you don't have power, you're poor. The darker the color on this map, the less likely you have access. And if you don't have access to electricity, you don't have connectivity. The lighter the color here is the internet penetration. If you don't have internet connectivity, if you don't have the ability to communicate, whether it's internet or whether it's printing press, you have corruption. If you can't speak about what's going on in your community, you will be taken advantage of by someone, whether it's the government or business or someone. And then, everybody read Barnett's books, the Pentagon's new map? If you haven't, it's a good read. Bottom line, one of the things I really like from it is his description of where we will have trouble as a military. Where will the military deploy over the next few decades? And it's the same places we were just talking about for the same reasons. They are part of what he calls the non-integrating gap. It's where infrastructure doesn't provide the needs that people have. And when people don't get their needs, they will fight for some way to get them. Energy is one of those needs. Development is linearly correlated. GDP, your income is linearly correlated with energy consumption. This has been known for a long time. You can look at this map quickly and see that, well, some folks are extremely energy intensive per unit GDP. That's because they have it. Russia doesn't need to be extremely energy efficient because they had coal and gas reserves for a lot of time. Countries like Ireland and Japan that don't have native resources for energy have become more energy efficient. The United States has gone from being relatively energy inefficient because we had lots of resources and were manufacturing intensive to shifting to a more energy efficient, but part of that could be just because we've changed from a manufacturing intensive to a more service intensive economy. But the bottom line is India, Sub-Saharan Africa doesn't even show up on this chart. Pasternak from Lawrence Livermore did a really interesting regression of electricity and Human Development Index. Anybody not know what Human Development Index is? I can give a lesson on it if you, or I'll just throw that there. So, Human Development composite statistic that includes GDP, health, and education outcomes. And while I did that, I ruined my slides. There we go. Okay. So, electricity consumption per capita correlated. He did it at 60 countries. I redid his calculation with 180 some odd countries over 3 decades, or three time periods. Bottom line is, if you linearize that, then you can see it even better. Human development and electrification are tightly correlated. I'm not saying it's causal. There's been a lot of research into which causes which, whether development causes consumption or consumption causes development. And I think that the argument there basically boils down to the fact that, yes, they both do. It's a feedback loop. If you have electricity, you develop. If you develop, then you use more electricity. And so they continue to feed back to each other. But as a bit of a nerd, if you can see the R squared there, 85%. 85% of the variation in Human Development Index can be correlated to, can be explained by electrification only, by per capita consumption of electricity. And that's not even part of the formula for it. So an 85% R squared is a pretty powerful explanatory. So that's one of the reasons why I work in electrification at the edge. We talk about the developed world and the developing world. Well, one thing, I don't like that word. It hides some stuff, and this chart shows it. Look at Sub-Saharan Africa in the purple on the bottom, called the developing world. We just saw what the correlation between electrification and development is. Their electrification has not grown in 30 years, not significantly, maybe just enough to keep up with population growth. So if your electrification isn't growing, it basically means your Human Development Index isn't growing. Is that part of the developing world? And one of the big reasons is economics. Electricity is expensive. It's not expensive for us, really, but it's expensive when you make 1/100th of what we make in the Western world. And the cost of electricity is 2 to 3 times to 10 times what it costs to get that electricity here. And then even if you get it, it's not always on. So better than showing statistics about it. So here's the US transmission, high voltage transmission grid, and that leads to a distribution grid that the best way to see it is satellite lighting at night. So where you see large intersections of wires, you see large lighting. Now if you go to Africa, keep an eye on that. This is Sabo, bunch of great work on the GIS work on electrification in Africa. Watch this line right here that goes from Egypt to Aswan down into DR Congo. It's not for the people that it goes by. Here, the electricity goes where the wire is. Here, the electricity goes to only a few people. You can look at it in, here's Dominican Republic, so it's not just sub-Saharan Africa. DR, and what I like about this is it encapsulates 3 very key geographies in one picture. So there's DR, DOMREP, that is mildly lit, but is still not part of the fully developed world. Here's Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, which is one of the poorest, it's poorer than most of the states, but is still radically more lit than Dominican Republic. And that dark part to the west of the DR, that's Haiti. You can see Leogane. You can see Leogane right there. But there's the line between the DR, between Dominican Republic and Haiti. You can even see the line, if the lighting was a little bit better, because you can see the deforestation. Maybe if you're square on it, you can see that the coloration between Haiti and DR is completely different because Haiti has denuded all of their forests for fuel. Uganda. The map on the left, the darker the color, the higher the population density. The map on the right shows the high voltage transmission circuitry, and they both show up there on the left. But what that really boils down to then is a distribution network from Umeme, the utility, there on the left in green. That is where power reaches, power from the grid. And on the right, that's where 3G. 4G is just getting to a few places. That's where 3G reaches, sometimes, in the dark orange. The light orange, you have cell phone connectivity. In the upper right, you have a very lightly populated region called Karamoja, a lot of herding, so it's hard to justify the expense of running the wire and running the internet and running cell phone circuitry there. But there's a place that does not have connectivity. And without the development, without electricity, you don't have development. Without development, your choices are pretty clear: poverty, death, disease. Solar is an option. Solar gets to the places where, it's interesting, the inverse correlation between solar power availability and the connectivity that we spoke of in the Barnett map. And again, this is some other work from Sabo that I really like. It's the map on the right is where is it cheaper to run diesel versus solar, and the blue is where diesel is better, by an economic balance, current prices, and the orange is where solar is better. And what you really see is countries that have access to oil, and then countries with infrastructure. Because it doesn't take long for you to get off of the infrastructure and into places, say in Uganda, where it only makes sense to truck it to Gulu, but once you start to get outside of Gulu, it's more than $1.30 a liter. And then just the cost of delivering the fuel ends up making it cost more than putting in something with a longer-term solar aspect to it, renewable. But people are using it. There are lots of entrepreneurs. This is in a place in northern Uganda called Pabo, where the guy's cutting hair with an 80-watt solar panel, a car battery, and an electric clipper. There are some things, though, that there becomes a huge capital barrier to entry. This is a 20 horsepower, 20 kilowatt, give or take, Chinese generator used to grind OD, peanuts. It would take a very large solar array, hundreds of thousands of dollars of solar capital to have this much power. Diesel works for some things. You just can't beat liquid dead dinosaur for energy density. Except for nuclear, and we don't have nuclear OD grinders yet. And solar is often too small, poorly installed, and poorly maintained. And part of that is, and this is like, there's an old thing in the Army that when you were getting trained and the instructor did this, that's going to be on the test. So this is a foot stomp moment. Poorly maintained. Why? Who installed this? An NGO from Japan. I'm not blaming Japan, we do the same thing. An NGO from Japan came in, flew in, installed it, and flew away. 2 or 3 years later, who's operating and maintain it? Who did they train? Who's going to continue to operate and maintain it? It's got a 20-year life cycle. It's got to last 10 years for it to pay for itself and for it to be economically sound. There's a reason why diesel makes a lot of sense in many cases, even gasoline. It's because the upfront cost is low, the maintenance the technical knowledge is there already in large part, the ability to fix it is there, and its life cycle is only 2 or 3 years before you're into the payback period. Here, you've got to make it last 10 years, and you don't have a maintenance person that knows how to do it. But then the grid is also too small, poorly maintained. This is a bit complex, but I want to run through it for a second. Basically, in the availability of the grid, there are two variables. When I had everybody stand up, there's one that was access. And access is not on this chart. This is reliability. And in reliability, there's does it break? And if it breaks, how long does it take to fix? So the does it break, how many outages per month? And Uganda, they're in the, right in the middle, has 10 outages per month that average about 10 hours each for 100 hours per month of outage. 100 out of 730 some on your average month. Doesn't sound like a lot, except that's enough that it doesn't make sense to have a refrigerator, because your meat and your milk will go bad most of the time unless you have backup power. Now, I throw the Republic of the Congo, French Congo's chart up there, but I don't believe it. I show their data up there. How many hours a month are they out? Can you see the number? It's on the right-hand axis. Over 700. On average, this is average from World Bank survey data, the Republic of the Congo's electric grid is out all month. I'm not sure that's true. I think we might be running into some survey frequency versus duration, instability of the survey question. So I just throw that for example. Let's ignore that one on that end. But in the middle, basically you have sub-Saharan Africa where you can expect 100 hours a month of outage. Now, another way to look at it, there's more data. Not every country has that data, is how many outages do you experience in a year? How many days with an outage? Don't know how long it was. And that exists for most countries across the world. And again, you start to see places like Bangladesh where there are 250 days with outages per year. That's 2/3 of the time. But what's really interesting is then if you look and see what does that do to an economy? Now, this is only a R squared of 42, so only about 48. Only about half of the variation in GDP per capita is a function of average days with outage. And I caveat this again too, this is a log scale. So, it's hiding a lot of variation in the linear. But what we can see is outages matter. It's not just access. If you can't rely on the grid, and you can just think about that anecdotally. If you're going to walk 4 kilometers to the place that has electricity to get a haircut, but the power is only on there 50% of the time, are you going to make that walk? Or are you going to find a non-powered solution? Are you going to use something that's older and more inefficient? If you want a cold Coke, are you going to walk 4 kilometers to the place that has a refrigerator when you don't know if their power is on or not until you get there? That has serious economic impacts in the long run. Now, this is a simpler way. This is the way I like to think about it because I'm a reliability engineer, is remember our standing up exercise? If I was to drop you somewhere in the world, could you plug in your cell phone? And if you did plug it in, would it have power? Would you actually be able to charge the battery? And so this is the multiplication of the probability of, is there access? And in Uganda, for example, which is here on the left, the third one from the left, 90% of the people do not have access. Only 10% of people in Uganda have access to electricity. And then that 100 out of 700 hours a month, or about 85% of the time that power is on, so about 15% it's off. And that gets you right in here to one of the least electrical access places in the world. Even Haiti is somewhere right here. Haiti, after the earthquakes and all that's gone on there, Uganda's infrastructure is not as strong as Haiti's. And we saw what that looked like there as compared to DR. So what are we doing about it? We've got some money from the Accenture Foundation and some donations from Hewlett-Packard to put in solar power. And I don't like solar power in and of itself. I like hybrids. Hybrids allow you flexibility and reliability that, what if the sun's not there for 3 or 4 days? So I still use diesel. I use diesel as a backup, but we try to minimize the amount of diesel we use. But we tie that solar hybrid with internet connectivity and entrepreneurship training. And one of the reasons we do entrepreneurship training is after going through a bunch of the outcomes that we wanted to get, creating jobs was a big one. But even if you provide the educational access through internet and internet training, even if you provide electrification, there is no one sitting there waiting to hire the newly trained person into a job. It's not like there's a newspaper with classified ads saying, we need 37 people to hire when you graduate from secondary school. You're going to have to create your own job, especially in new businesses and new ventures, because no one, and I think this gets to what I like the thought that Corinne had there too, with the fail fast, with the fail early, fail cheap, and in part because you can only do, I'm a systems engineer, I do requirements analysis. What's the requirement? We don't know. We don't know what the requirement is for a growing economy in Gulu, because it's not the same as everywhere else. We don't know what it is in Haiti because it's not the same as everywhere else. And it's not for me to decide and dictate. It's going to take a lot of local learning. And I don't decide what the entrepreneurs from our training do for a job. We try to give them the skills to analyze it and see whether it will make money, whether it can be sustainable both environmentally and economically. But I don't have the knowledge to say whether it's a good idea for Uganda. And some of them are going to fail, and some of them are going to fail early, and we hope they fail cheaply, and then they move on to do something else. That's just a summary of the site. We're doing 3 sites as a pilot, again, to allow us to fail and learn and see what should be done next. And so I don't want this to be a slideshow. If you have any questions on anything you see, please let me know, but these were a lot of the fun pictures I took in a month-long installation trip this past summer. One of the first things, and this got to that, the small, rickety, doesn't meet the needs solar installation that will fail hard soon because there isn't someone to maintain it. First thing we wanted to do was train a bunch of installers, at least with some basics of how to operate and maintain and install a solar hybrid microgrid. And then we had to deliver the stuff, and in the developing world, delivery is a challenge. Logistics are a challenge. There's no forklift to take 4 tons of gear out of the container. If I had to redesign it, I'd say one of the things we failed early and failed expensively on was the systems were too big for manhandling. We managed it, but it was harder than it needed to be. How do you get a container off of a truck in Gulu when you don't have a container lift crane? You tie it to a tree and you drive out from under it. And it worked. And then, if you're trying to do an install in Pabo, which is about 30 kilometers, 20 kilometers north of Gulu, and the road is completely blocked because a truck has tried to go through the place where the construction crew is still digging a trench, and the truck is buried this deep, and now all of your gear is in a truck that can't get up that road. And this isn't a small road. This isn't a road that is getting out to a remote village. This is the main road from Kampala to Gulu to Juba, South Sudan. This is where all of the food that goes from banana farms in Uganda to take bananas into South Sudan goes, and it's blocked, completely blocked. There is no passing it, except if you have a motorcycle and you bonsai down over the side of it. So the team of 20 that we had trained that was supposed to go up and learn how to finish this install didn't quite make it. 4 of us did on motorcycles and finished the install with a Leatherman, which was fun. But mostly we had, and the goal of our pilot was not just to install power plants, it was to develop a cadre of folks that knew how to install power plants that could then operate and maintain them for a while. And I'd like to declare victory on that. On the first installation, by the end of the day, I could barely walk from going up and down the roof, from chasing things down that were not being done the way I thought they should be done. And I wasn't worried about whether it was the best way. I was worried about whether it was safe because I wanted them to learn ways and adapt to it. The second installation was the one with the Leatherman, and I was a little bit involved with that, but mostly I just had to coach the 4 guys as we did a little bit more simple one. And the third one I sat and watched. The only thing I did on the third one was install the lightning arrestor because I wanted to feel like I had done something that day. And this is the team that did it. We connected that to this business and entrepreneurship training center at each site. And the first thing that would happen once we had power to them was the folks that were working on the solar installation would try to get online as quickly as they could because they could. There's a great hunger and need for the connectivity that we're able to provide to the point where they would stay late and stick on it. This is the Entrepreneurship Library, and it's not quite what Chattanooga's worked up to, but it was a huge endeavor from one of our partners, a group called 31 Lengths. Anyone know the horse race? It was the dominant racehorse, the one that just crushed everyone. Secretariat. So Secretariat won the race by 31 lengths. So their NGO name is 31 Lengths, Run Your Own Race. And they're building this entrepreneurship center in Lacho in northern Uganda. They started with some library books. We now have them connectivity, so they don't just have access. Paper books matter. People still want to be able to turn pages on a lot of things. And for someone especially who hasn't had access to a book, it's a huge, huge learning endeavor. But then also through the internet connectivity that we have an intranet library where we have a lot of access to things that are local. And then it's a narrow pipe, and we're working on it to get back to internet access. But we try to bring a bunch of stuff, video training and things like that, into the intranet so that it can go inside basically almost a gig internal pipe, but the bottleneck is reaching back out to the world. This is the installation in Pabo. We didn't take it down off of the ground. This is a tool that we use to do rapid deploy. It was actually a solar array that's designed for the military to take on to forward bases. And they face a lot of the same challenges that are faced in a developing world, in the austere environment, you want to have the IKEA version of plug and play, open it up, unfold it, and have it work, rather than having to spend weeks tightening bolts and connecting things. And that's the installation crew. And then that's the other internet cafe there that we hooked up there with our city manager, the Pabo sub-county directors checking out their newly found connectivity. And that's our first customer. So one of the things that we also wanted to do is this power was supposed to go to a scale where household electrification works really well to get lighting, and it does great things. It keeps people from burning taduba and kerosene and other dirty fuels for lighting at night. And so, put a small solar panel, even just a solar lantern, can get away from those harmful health effects of breathing internal smoke, breathing in smoke inside the home. And then it allows you to study later at night. And so it can have the longer-term increased education outcomes with increased income outcomes from that. But as far as doing work today and starting a job, that nanoscale solar, the tens of watts, doesn't let you do real work. Now, the first thing that people will say is, well, you could have a cell phone charging business. Yes, you can, and that's one of the first businesses that have come from a lot of these. But how many people can have a cell phone charging business? About 1 in 20. And so there has to be some next level of, maybe we can't do peanut grinding yet from a small scale solar just because it takes that much power, but there's a lot of stuff in between. Things like starting a cantina to sell a cold beverage where you could only used to get warm. Clinics are also, that same technology to do the cold beverage also can keep medicines cold and make them last longer and allow you to provide medical services. What David Akena does is fixes things. He's been running a small welding shop, a soldering shop, from an 80-watt solar panel on his house, and now he has access to kilowatt scale. So he can work longer, have more customers, and that smile on his face is because he knows what that means for his ability to feed his family and send them to school. And despite the Dr. Seuss ladder, this was actually a safe installation on the roof of King James School in Lyra. And one of the big things I wanted to say there was these guys bought in. They were very concerned that we were selling them smoke, that to get to this school in Lyra, we had to go by 30 other schools from where we were based. And why would we go by these 30 schools and go to King James School in Lyra? So they wouldn't wire the place. They don't have any electricity at the moment. They wouldn't wire the place to get ready for the installation until we showed up with the gear. But then that meant we couldn't show up with the gear because they weren't wired and ready for it. So we were in a bit of a catch-22. And finally, after lots of miscommunication, we convinced them that we actually were going to show up with a solar power plant for their school, and they put in just a beautiful bit of wiring, and I wish they would come do my house, because they plastered everything into the walls. It was well-protected circuitry. I'm very confident that they will be able to keep this thing up and running after what they have learned. And so this is a picture of the power that we were able to get. It's static right now. I'm having a hard time getting it dynamically because the pipe is so thin. We get timeout errors all the time trying to get second-level data from our sites. And this is really what I try to do, is get research quality data. And I've got a guy that does control systems for microgrids who wants second-level data on what are the instabilities going on, how's the power being used, what does something like this power spike here in the middle at the end of the day, in that middle day, what does that do to the stability of the system, and how can the system manage it? If you can't tell what this is 3 days in Pabo, and the yellow is the use of the computer center using power. The green is the solar energy generated, and then the light turquoise, that's a soldering iron. That's Mr. David Akena fixing radios at night, and with his solar-powered soldering iron. And we can blow it up, and I wanted to show up, this is just a few minutes of a view to show that sometimes we run into the problem that the solar power is less than what we're pulling from right now, but that's why we have batteries, and if the batteries go down, that's why we go into a hybrid system that I would like to include diesel as a backup, just both for reliability, but then also to tend to the system. And what does this mean for impact? And that Pasternak data on a regression of HDI, I did doubled that up and then backed it back all the way out to what would the impact be at various levels on GDP directly. So at Uganda's current level of development, for every additional kilowatt hour of consumption, you can expect $10 to $15 of economic activity. And when that kilowatt is costing on the order of 50 cents to $1, that's a pretty good investment, especially when that is so correlated with the other factors of human development. Now, ICT, I don't need to tell this audience about the importance of ICT, but one of the things that got us working in northern Uganda was this group called Bosco Uganda. And I actually know Father Gino and was invited here through Father Gino because he shares some space with Bosco Uganda in Gulu. And what Bosco does is provides internet connectivity originally to displaced persons camps in northern Uganda. And the founder, a guy named Gus Zilke, who is kind of a rock star in a lot of ways. He's completely unassuming, overweight, not healthy, catechist from South Bend, Indiana, went to Kampala to give a talk to a church group, to a group of bishops and priests, and wanted to go up north. And this was in the heart of the Coney Wars. This is when northern Uganda was pretty much no-go. And they said, no mono north. You can't go north of, Whitey can't go north of the Nile. It's not safe. They'll stop you at the bridge and they won't let you go. So Gus said, okay, I won't take the bridge. I got you. And he went over here and he said, hey, can I charter a flight? And so he booked a flight up to the north and ran in. And one of the, long story, don't want this to be a slideshow on my summer vacation to Uganda, but he asked this nun, what can we do? How can we help? I want to help raise money and help the people in displaced persons camps. And he was thinking, well, wells, clinics, schools. And she said, I want internet connectivity. And he was a little taken aback by that. And he had to dig in and ask why. And she said, well, you can buy me a well, you can raise money for a clinic, but if I have connectivity, I can first know what's going on. I don't know where the Coney army is right now, and it helps me to share that information with this community to know whether they need to go hide. But I can write a grant, and I can get 10 wells, and I can write another grant, and I can get a clinic, and I can write another grant, and I can get a school. But if you give me one of those things, that's all I have. And it's the teach a man to fish that's been beaten to death for 30, 40, 50 years of development thought. But the connectivity lets the person take control of their own future. And I'll take questions because the rest of this stuff is nerdlicious.
Ready for questions? You scared them, Patrick. You scared them. But I've never heard anything, I think, more astounding in terms of the importance of connecting, empowering, transforming than even this last section. Incredible.
Please ask a question. Stump me. Please, sir.
So you've done all the analysis and you know pretty much what's missing, wrong, and ought to be.
I think I would say we know what is necessary, not necessarily what is sufficient.
So what are you doing about sufficiency?
Well, I don't know yet. There's so much that needs to be, well, let me see which one. I know that electrification is foundational because communication is foundational. And both of them are necessary for each other. Because I need the communication to actually make the electricity work. I need the electricity to make the communication work. Everything that comes after that, I think, takes a level of creativity that is beyond me, that actually has to be built and customized for the location. Even the technique of electrification needs to be customized for the location. I'll put an example out there. In the places where you had more outages, more frequent outages that were shorter, India, for example, versus somewhere like Uganda that has fewer but longer outages, the actual technology you would use to optimally solve that and give more reliable access. India, you can do it largely with batteries. You can just put basically a UPS system. Basically, your laptop would run in India quite well because you would get power back before your laptop battery was gone. In Uganda, that's not true. We would often have 3 or 4 days of power outages, and no laptop battery is going to last that long. So first, there's a technology modification, a technology adaptation that needs to be customized. And on top of that, there's so much culture that is way beyond my engineering brain that I think it takes more people than I have, and I think that's where a lot of the community comes in. We are not doing anything in northern Uganda without our community partners. I don't decide who the recipients are. We work with the Bosco as our agent to help build a decision process to who is ready, who can benefit the most.
When you hear Father Gino talking about founding a university in the Gulu area,
Yes, sir.
what do you think?
It's about time. No,
Does he have a chance?
I actually work at a university that was founded in rural Indiana in the mid-1800s, far from anything or anyone. And when they built it, they kind of dreamed big, and then it burned to the ground. And all of the Holy Cross brothers, said, well, I guess it's time to go back to Paris. And Father Soren said, no, I know what we did wrong. We built it too small. This is God saying, let's go bigger. And so we did.
Okay.
And there's
He used Canton's Belden
and he used
brick,
Canton,
too.
and he used Belden bricks. Belden bricks from Canton. And I think that Father Gino needs to make sure that he doesn't dream too small.
That's interesting.
Perfect message. Yes, Dr. Bo.
I can say that Archbishop John Baptista Odama is a friend of mine, and I've been to northern Uganda a number of times. And probably the reason why we have both Father Gino, who is the designate to start the university under the leadership of the Archbishop, and Mr. Patrick Okono, who is the Board of Directors chair, the reason that they're here today is to have what Lou said, to connect. And the challenge I would give this group is, if you think the challenge is daunting, if you think your world has challenges, just imagine how your brothers and sisters in Christ have to deal with day and day when that is where they live. And if you want, the challenge I would offer this group, and I've offered it to Lou as well, please do not let them go home unconnected, because it takes much more resources. It'll take the church universal, it'll take Patrick is working with us in the process. I'm proud to say I'm a member of the board of directors of this nascent university. And as one of those members of the board of directors, it's my job to either give or get. And I can't give enough to start a university, but what I can help happen is to help get people with talent and resources that collectively none of us have enough, individually none of us have enough, but collectively we all can really help and do this. So I would really like at this point for Father Gino to address you at this time, and maybe Mr. Patrick as well. You need to listen to them, and please, don't let them go home unconnected. Each of you can help, and I challenge each of you here to make a connection with them so that when they go home, they are connected to the Church Universal and to the Human Family Universal that can help start this Catholic university in Gulu.
Father Gino.
May I come up here?
Yep. The floor is yours, sir.
Well, I didn't expect that I would be asked to speak at this August gathering. It's a great privilege for me and for my chair, Mr. Patrick Okumumon, to be here. And we are so grateful to the ICF for inviting us to be part of this experience. As Dr. Bovas mentioned, my Archbishop, His Grace Archbishop John Baptist Odama, has decided to establish a new university. For most of us in the American context, the best thing would have been to say a small liberal arts college, although I'm being told to dream much bigger, but I also have to be realistic. The context is that we have in the region been through more than 23 years of war. Many of you may have seen the CON 2012 videos that came viral on the internet. The timing may not have been exact, but the experiences were real, and we have been part of that experience. And now that the war has basically subsided, and hopefully we shall not have any more war in northern Uganda and southern Sudan, since 2007, 2006, towards the end, the challenge now is for rebuilding our communities. And for my Archbishop, this is a pastoral challenge. We have a people who have been through war and displacement, through dehumanization, with lots and lots of trauma. How do we rebuild our communities after many years? We have a society that have been forced during the war times to live in camps in very deplorable conditions. We have a new generation that have not known what it means to be peaceful, what it means to live in the normal home setting. A generation that have lived only with the experience of handouts. And young people who might even think handouts are what they're entitled to. And this is the challenge of rebuilding a community. And my Archbishop sees that, yes, we have to establish this university, first of all, to address the trauma and the effects of war. It's like an emergency response to the war and its effects that will take many years. But this is just the first step. Now, as people go back into their homes, as people have to relearn how to live in their communities, how can we again heal the wounds of injustices, the wounds of bitterness that have been created? And so then, peace studies, conflict resolution becomes an issue of interest to us. But again, our people have resources basically in their land, and now they have to be retrained and to focus on how do we use our resources to improve our conditions. And so the area of development studies become of real concern to us. But again, this whole issue of creativity in how we network and improve our livelihood is the challenge that we want to address by this university. Now, we are very privileged to have the encouragement and, may I say, an informal partnership at the moment with Walsh University. I have been formed by Walsh, having graduated here in 2004 with my MBA here at Walsh, and for which I'm very grateful. And Walsh has been very supportive of this initiative to support the healing process in northern Uganda. For the last 5 years, they've been sending graduate students and graduate faculty from the Counseling and Human Development Department to train targeted groups of people in basics of counseling skills. And the idea is this. You may be working in the bank, but someone who is lining up in the bank and is very impatient is not only impatient because it's taking long, but it's a traumatized person. You may be working in the health unit. You're a nurse, you're a doctor. The person is not coming just because he or she is a patient, but this person is affected by the trauma. You're driving into town, you see somebody walking in the middle of the road, you think he's crazy. The mind is not there. And so everyone in the region needs to be exposed to basic skills of handling people who have gone through trauma and through conflict. And it has affected everyone. Sometimes the emphasis seems to be only on people who have been abducted, people who have been beaten up. But think of a man who failed to provide for his family. What kind of man are you? You're impotent. You failed to provide for your family. You are traumatized, and there's nowhere you can address this trauma. And we have had many cases of suicide that people commit suicide because they've given up in life. And so the University of the Sacred Heart that is being established is to address these long-term effects of war. But it's not only about counseling. It's about total health of mind, heart, and body. This is the motto that we're adopting for the university: health of mind, heart, and body. And as we begin to have initial discussions, we have had very interesting discussions with folks here at Walsh who have been kind of mentoring us too. We have been having discussions on the library front with the library people from here, a librarian from Kent State, library professor from Kent State, retired now, and also a librarian from Akron U. So we are looking into how we can use electronic resources to save on space, and then to also have access to lots of resources that would have otherwise been difficult. And so IT becomes really an issue of great concern and interest to us. Patrick Murphy, in his presentation, spoke of the BOSCO project. BOSCO is actually an acronym: Battery Operated Systems for Community Outreach. And this was actually one of the initiatives, as I mentioned, started by a catechist who reached out to the community in northern Uganda. It's an initiative of the Archdiocese of Gulu. And the Archbishop has seen that through this, we have that great potential of reaching out. I know I'm taking very long, I'm sorry. But from an opportunity perspective, let us look at the region of South Sudan, having got their independence recently. Northern Uganda, with the emphasis now for the peace, reconstruction, and development, and the focus of new opportunities for business. I think this should be a region of interest to anyone who has a far-sighted idea of business in the region. And of course, we have interest from different stakeholders, Chinese, Japanese, and everyone else, and I think it's important for us to be part of this movement forward. And for us, we believe that the University of the Sacred Heart can be that locus through which we can network with the community. And actually, part of our policy is to require of all our students, we are still in the planning process, to be involved with the community. So that whether you're studying accounting, we should be able to link you up with some aspect of the community, whether at the local council level, whether at a school, to help them see how your knowledge makes difference in the community. And it's really our hope that we can continue the spirit of the ICF to see how the University of the Sacred Heart can bring that connection between education, community development, and also networking with others, and entrepreneurship and creativity. It's a great privilege for us to be here. We sometimes feel like the underdogs, and indeed we are the underdogs, because people ask, you're starting in a place that has been through war. Where will they get the money? Who will pay for it? All these are real questions that from a business perspective you cannot ignore. But from a man of faith like the Archbishop, he tells me, all the money in the world belongs to God. God has that money. And if it is God's work, it's going to happen. If you believe you're part of God's work, you will help to make this happen. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Well, I think we have illuminated here this morning that the story of transforming communities is definitely told in very human terms. And what we'd like to offer you is we're going to be asking our thought leaders this morning to wander to our atrium area, just on the other side of this room. And we have some focal points there so that you would have the opportunity to connect with any of our thought leaders this morning, including our delegates from northern Uganda, so that you can ask them questions, share something, or just say you were with a celebrity today. So they will be out there following this session. And remember that when lunch comes up at 11:30, we have an incredible speaker for you that will take us on to the promise. Okay? And we certainly have a good feel for the challenges and the beauty and faith of solutions. So would you please help me again in thanking our thought leaders this morning, Trung T. Lee, Corinne Hill, Patrick Murphy. You were incredible. Thank you very much for being with us.